Hello, welcome to this 7-week course, Discover Yourself. My name is Carolyn Barber and I'll be your facilitator for the next 7 weeks. The structure of the course is that the first and final sessions are webinars at a set time. Although these have been pre-recorded, I am here watching the webinar with you. You can ask questions and make comments in the chat and I can respond in real time. The sessions in between will include pre-recorded presentations and exercises for you to complete. The materials will be released weekly on Friday mornings and you can complete in your own time. There is also a link to a community chat room specifically for this course, so please feel free to comment, ask questions or start discussions in that forum. I'm now going to share my screen. And talk you through the slides. So this 7-session course is an opportunity for self-discovery and self-development through exploring the 5 core components of good mental health: character, composure, connection, creativity, and challenge. You'll be able to see your strengths and skills more clearly and identify a personal development plan to move forward. In particular, the course will explore experiences during the corona pandemic and how the 5 C's framework can help to build psychological resilience in the most challenging of circumstances. In this first session, I'll introduce the overall course content and explain how it will work. We'll explore some background information around mental health and new developments in our understanding. I'll talk about the change curve and the emotional journeys we take in response to change. And I'll also look at the spirit of curiosity and compassion as 2 more C's and the way in which I hope you'll approach this course. First, let me introduce some ground rules. By confidentiality, I mean that everyone is expected to keep any personal information shared by others confidential to the group. This will really only apply to shared information in the community forum or on the webinar chat space, given the nature of this virtual course. However, if any information is shared which I believe could be harmful to the person themselves or to others, I may need to discuss with other relevant agencies on a need-to-know basis. You may want to ask yourself these questions about the ground rules. What does confidentiality mean? How do you know you're being treated with respect? What is a beginner's mind? And how can you take care of yourself? And if you have any suggestions about other ground rules or questions about these, please do ask. These principles of the course are important and I'll go through each one. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead. Some of these principles are different from other approaches to mental health and well-being. You are capable of understanding and working on your emotional health and well-being, no matter what your circumstances. Understanding the cause of a problem is not a necessary step towards a solution. You are already doing some of the solution, some things that work. The answers lie in your own practical experience. You are capable of making changes to your life. Change creates change. It's the small practical steps that work. Development is a difficult process. That's why you have to want to do it. You can do it if you want to. Life is a journey, not an outcome. So before I go on, I'd just like to say a little about how I came into this line of work. You could say I've been studying people's mental health and well-being for over 30 years. Just briefly to say that I'm a qualified, registered and experienced social worker. I've worked in local authorities, the voluntary sector and in higher education in many different roles. But in 2006, now 14 years ago, I decided to leave my full-time job and go self-employed. In 2007, a month before the so-called credit crunch, I opened a training and wellbeing centre in Southsea called The Parlour. 3 years later, in 2010, I closed it down because the lease ended and I couldn't afford to keep it going. I was at a very low ebb. I felt that I'd failed with my business. And I knew I really needed to work hard on my own mental well-being so as not to become overwhelmed with stress myself. I knew this because I had previously experienced a breakdown which resulted in me being diagnosed with clinical depression and severe anxiety disorder. Out of the process of reflection I went through in 2010, I developed what I call a framework for good mental health, the 5 C's. This is a tool I was able to use myself and subsequently in group workshops and one-to-one clients, which promotes a strength-based, solution-focused approach, moving people towards good mental health, whatever their starting point, rather than focusing on their problems and dysfunction, if you like. I also began to talk more openly about my own experiences of mental ill health, moving on to co-found the Good Mental Health Cooperative as a social enterprise in 2013. This then became the catalyst that has moved me forward ever since. So if I ask a group of people, and I've tried this with quite a few different kinds of groups, what words they associate with the term mental health, they invariably come up with words like madness, depression, stress, mental illness, psychiatric hospitals. And then when I ask people about the term good mental health, words like happiness, well-being, fulfillment, achieving things, active, motivated, they all come up. So it's become really apparent to me that the words mental health, which really should apply in a general sense, just like physical health, have somehow become linked with all the stigma, fear, and ignorance which characterises our lack of understanding of mental ill health. So just to be clear where I'm coming from in this workshop and in this course, I believe we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, and that there's a spectrum of good to poor mental health, and there's mental ill health, which can be disabling and extremely distressing. Most people will go up and down that spectrum during the course of their life experience, and many will go through a period that they may call a really low point, a breakdown, losing it, whatever. And just as with physical health, there are some very clear and simple messages we can take on board about how to take care of our mental health. And the big difference about where I'm coming from is that I focus on how to work towards good mental health, no matter where your starting point is. So here we are in the middle of a pandemic. We're highly aware of the risks to our physical health, but what does this mean for our mental health? A good deal of international research has been done about the psychological impact of these different scenarios of quarantine, disasters, and economic social pressures. With COVID-19, we have all three. In the UK, we know from statistics compiled by the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, that there's a massive increase in anxiety in the general public. Nearly half, that's 46.9%, have reported high levels of anxiety, and more than half feel that coronavirus has affected their well-being. We know that there are particular high-risk groups. Frontline staff are very much affected, not just in health and social care, but transport workers, supermarket staff, and so on. The psychological impacts from coronavirus are a kind of mental equivalent to the physical challenge of running a marathon. So what can we do to build our resilience individually and collectively in our communities? How do we prepare and train for this mental marathon ahead? A great deal has developed in the last 20 to 30 years around our understanding of mental health. Many of these developments are little understood, but are having a growing influence on how support services are delivered. Often new developments have been pioneered in the armed services to support those in active service and veterans to overcome psychological distress from their experiences. We know now about neuroplasticity in our brains, which means our thought patterns and behaviours can change. Psychology has traditionally looked at why people behave badly, but the new movements in positive psychology studies what makes people behave well and feel happier. There's also been international research around well-being in different countries and communities. Suffice to say that the UK doesn't come out high on the international well-being scales. New therapies and approaches have been developed by people learning from their own experiences of severe mental distress. And mindfulness has been adopted as an effective treatment for severe depression and is used in various other areas of healthcare and personal development. This change curve is derived from the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She actually researched the experiences of people with terminal illness, exploring the emotional stages they went through. But her work has been adapted to describe the internal emotional journey that individuals typically experience when dealing with change and transition. This journey consists of a number of stages that people go through: shock and denial, anger, bargaining, frustration, depression, and acceptance. There are different adaptations of the change curve, and this is one of them. It's important to recognise that this isn't necessarily a linear process, but it does help to illustrate common emotional stages which we all experience. Here's a short story I like to tell to try and illustrate this. One winter, I was booked to do a day's training on the Isle of Wight. I'm self-employed, work is pretty short in January, and this was well paid. On the day, I woke to find it was snowing. At first, I just couldn't accept that this would be a problem. I phoned taxis, the ferry service, and finally the island's bus information service to find it was literally impossible for me to get there. I was very upset and frustrated, and then began to feel very negative and down. I'd lost a significant amount of money and was unsure if they would rebook me and when. I felt as if the day was completely wasted. Gradually, I started to do some other things, eventually finding something I felt was a worthwhile use of the day. This whole process, the whole curve of emotions that I went through, took about a day. If I had been feeling depressed or low, perhaps it would have taken me a week to go through these stages. If I had been in an even more positive frame of mind, maybe all those stages would have taken an hour. The point is that all these stages are quite normal. The real difficulties arise when we get stuck in a particular stage. And lots of people do get stuck on that bottom curve, trying something different, experimenting, which may not work, and then swinging back into depression, frustration, and anger. I think this is the point where external support is most effective, helping people get through that experimental stage to move on in their lives. So here's the outline of the 5 C's framework that I developed several years ago. You can see that under each of the 5 C's, there's a brief definition of what I mean by each one. For character, it's about being aware of our strengths, skills and resources, understanding the personal values which are most important to us, and it's also about the story we tell ourselves and others about ourselves. Composure is about finding peace of mind, creating distance from our thoughts and emotions, connecting with spirituality. Connection includes our wider social network as well as close family and friends, and is also about what we're able to give to others. Creativity is about finding joy in our lives, having fun, using our imagination, as well as engaging in playful, creative activities. And challenge is about stepping out of our comfort zone, having goals we're working towards, personal growth through learning and development. During this course, we'll explore each of these components of mental resilience and well-being, and you'll build up a picture for yourself about where your strengths are and what would help you to develop your own personal well-being plan. So here you can see I've developed the 5 C's into the picture of a figure, with character and composure being the legs of our mental health, the areas that keep us balanced. Connection and creativity are like our arms reaching out to the wider world. And challenge is where our head is at, putting our thinking skills to best use. I then added 2 extra C's as a way of looking at how we should approach the 5 C's. Curiosity is represented by the outer circle because this framework is about looking outwards rather than inwards. And compassion is represented by the heart. We always need to have self-compassion in particular on this journey, and this is something we explore more a little later. What do we mean by a framework? So having a conceptual framework can help us make some sense out of complex ideas. There are 2 definitions of a framework which are particularly relevant here. First, it is a set of coherent ideas or concepts organised in a way that makes them easy to communicate with others. And second, a framework can provide a basis for thinking about what we do and about what it means, influenced by the ideas and research of others. A framework can be used rather like a travel map. Like a map, a framework can help us make decisions about the route we want to take, and it can show us that there may be many different paths to get to the same place. Using a conceptual framework, we can explain why we would try this or that path based on the experiences of others and also on our own particular circumstances. Very often when we're stressed, anxious or depressed, we can become quite self-absorbed. The antidote to self-absorption is curiosity, and this is something you can practice. Ask questions, be interested, notice what's going on around you. It's said to be virtually impossible to be curious and depressed at the same time, so I like to offer that up as a challenge. What happens to your mood when you get curious? You may recall the phrase, curiosity killed the cat, but the origin of this phrase was actually care killed the cat, where care meant worry and anxiety in the 16th century. The phrase changed in the 19th century, possibly as curiosity became an undesirable trait, disapproved of by the establishment. It's high time curiosity was rehabilitated as being good for our mental health. The other common trait from being stressed, anxious or depressed is to be very self-critical. So practicing an attitude of self-compassion is essential in building resilience and well-being. Be kind to yourself Notice what you're already doing to take care of your mental health, things that you might not have recognized in this way. I use this image of a bucket to remind us of what can happen when we're giving out energy to others, like water through the holes. Unless we keep topping up the water or our energy, the bucket runs dry and we're left exhausted, depleted, and demotivated. I'm just going to read a poem called Kindness. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things, feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore, only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread, only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. That's a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye. So there's an exercise on this, on how would you treat a friend, an exercise sheet on this to do during the week. But just for now, think about these questions. How would you respond to a friend who's feeling really low or struggling in some way? What tone would you use? How do you respond to yourself if you're feeling low or struggling in some way? What tone would you use? And is there a difference? I'm coming to the end of this webinar now. As I'm here on the call with you, please do comment or ask questions in the chat. I'll stay on the line for another 10 minutes or so. If you have any questions later, just go to the course community chat forum and post there. There are some tasks of the week for you to download, and I'd like you to watch this video of Brené Brown. There's a link there for you. And there are 3 reflective exercises for you to do. The first is asking you what kind of journey you're on right now in your life. The second is the one I mentioned about how you would treat a friend. And the third is to help you think about how you respond to changes that you have some control over and those that you don't have control over. It may be worth reflecting back on previous experiences and comparing those to how you've responded to the coronavirus crisis. So thank you for listening to this webinar, and do post your comments and I'll respond, and see you on the course chat. Bye.